webinar series. Today's topic, in fact, our theme for the month is integrations and how PS can benefit from having their PSA solution integrated with other systems. So I kick everything off this week with a general conversation, basically wanting to give you guys ideas about things to watch out for, best practices, and then the next 2 weeks we'll be talking specifics about certain systems. So next week we'll be talking about Dell Boomi from resources from our OpenAir team, and in 2 weeks we'll be talking about FinancialForce and system integrations that have been done by our team with FinancialForce. Getting into the presentation, I wanted to remind you of what's coming up. Obviously, I mentioned the 2 webinars already. And for those of you who are OpenAir users, we have a user group actually scheduled up in Boston on July 22nd. It actually has sold out once, but we were able to get some more seats. So if you're interested, please sign up right away. So how we're going to approach the topic here is first I'm going to talk about different PS solutions. There may be familiar from our YPSA presentation earlier this year, but basically the types of solutions that can be in the cloud. And when you have systems in the cloud, you also want to think about that doesn't mean you can't integrate with them. So there's still ways to integrate with them. So we'll talk about common integrations that happen with PSA tools that we've seen or that we've helped implement, and then things to consider when you're considering the integrations regarding the approach and the things to watch out for as far as pitfalls are concerned and best practices. So looking at the PS solutions that are in the cloud, almost all PSA vendors have a SaaS solution, a cloud solution. Things like we support NetSuite OpenAir and FinancialForce, those are cloud-based systems. But other systems like Kimball are on the Salesforce platform, that is also cloud-based. Workday certainly has their cloud-based solution, and MavenLink. ChangePoint is one of those systems that has an on-premise install or in the cloud version. But basically, when you're considering your PSA solution and what you're implementing, of course, you're going to also have to consider the fact of where's the data stored. And if it's in the cloud, it's not like it's in this mystical place. Somebody has a server somewhere which is storing the data. It tends to be on the vendor's environment. So your solutions, when they're in the cloud, are actually on somebody else's server. And usually there's a typical approach that I've seen happen with solutions in the cloud where you still want a copy of your data, so you'll get like a backup service or an FTP file or a database dump in some manner so that you physically own the data, you just don't have it on premise. So those kind of backup services help you at least keep a copy of your own data in a locality inside your organization. But that copy of data may be something that you use to do for integrations, or you may have to choose integration approaches with the vendor's servers. So what kind of integrations have we seen with PSA solutions in the past? I always put PSA in the middle of the world. It's like the sun in the center of the solar system. But the PSA solution, because PSA is one of those tools that typically keeps both people information, project information, financial information, that means that there's potential for a lot of system overlap with other systems you may have in-house. So a common overlap is your CRM system, which is your Salesforce, your sales tracking tools, Sugar CRM, Microsoft, those kind of things. This tool is an overlap with PSA simply because your sales guys are out there selling solutions. As they're selling solutions, they're handing it off to your PS team to deliver on the solution. And, of course, the folks that are looking just in the world of PSA want to know what's coming. So the integration here tends to be more of a, hey, here's what's getting hot in the sales cycle. Here's what's potentially closing soon. Get your resources in line, do your staffing plans, start thinking about how we're going to deliver on this. Another common integration is your ERP or your financial system, because your PSA tends to have information about time and expense, maybe information about milestones for billing purposes, maybe information about revenue, and that information needs to go into the accounting system. And so integration between PSA and your accounting system is actually quite common, simply because you don't want to retype the data. So if I know somebody worked 10 hours on a T&M project at $175 an hour, I don't want to turn around and type in $1,750 on an invoice. I want the data to pass across automatically, and then I can generate the invoice in the ERP system so that you can do your accounting. Likewise, you'll see that both of these integrations have bidirectional notes. So the PSA, in addition to the CRM talking to the PSA can talk back to the CRM and give information to the sales guys that may be critical for them to be aware of in their account management. Maybe how many hours have been burned against the budget, maybe how much has been invoiced, or if there's outstanding invoices for collection. That kind of information could be sent from the PSA backwards into the sales system. And likewise, in the accounting system, as you're getting things like your vendor payables, your invoice payables, expense reimbursements, those things can come back into PSA so that the people who are focused in just the world of PSA can see where they stand as far as client collections and getting their money back for out-of-pocket expenses. And so having these three systems actually connected together, you can pass information from your accounting system through PSA backwards into Salesforce or in the sales system quite easily, as you can see that. Now, other integrations that we've seen customers need and put in place are things like a human capital management system, HCM. This is where you're doing your resource management. Things like, and not so much the scheduling tends to be in PSA, but an HCM can maybe have a performance management, looking for staff qualifications, maybe even your skill profiles in here. It also could be vendor management. It could have subcontractors, the agreements that you have in place, and how to engage them. So the HCM, because it's a people system, instead of the CRM being an opportunity in a project system and the ERP being an accounting and a finance system, the HCM is a people system. And since your PSA has to deal with people and the need for subcontractors, and integration with an HCM system is also quite common. Now, other ones that we've seen, and these are more like data imports or data exports, but technically those are still integrations. Things like a corporate card, a Diners Club or an American Express or Visa, and basically you're bringing those expenses in, if they're centrally billed, into your PSA so that people can identify, hey, where did this information get logged to as far as project expenses are concerned. In some cases, the corporate card is actually a whole expense system, like a Concur or something, and that expense system just has direct feeds to various vendor information, so that passes back into the PSA system. And then thinking in terms of an output, quite often there's integrations with payroll systems. And the reason the PSA system would be integrated with a payroll would be things like passing over vacation that's been taken, or certain time codes such as jury duty or bereavement, where the payroll system is accommodating that from a tracking purpose. So these are all sort of, and then there's many more. I mean, there's always the one-offs and the unique ones that are specific to your environment. But these are pretty common ones because PSA has a lot of information with a lot of overlap to existing systems. So when you're thinking about integrating your systems, there's really two main approaches that I think of. And one is batch, which we're basically on a scheduled basis. We're sending data from one system to another. Things like invoicing at month end, things like payroll every pay period. Those are batch things. You don't really need to send the data over as it's created. The other is near real time, and I say near real time because nothing instantly shows up in two places at once. So this would be more of the, as I create the data and save the records, I'm expecting that data to show up in the other system pretty quickly, within maybe a window of a couple of minutes or even less, depending on how real time you've been able to build the integration. So those two approaches for integration really drive sort of how quickly you'll get the data from point A to point B, and in deciding which one to go with, there's really a lot of decisions that have to be made along the way. First and foremost, why do you want to do the integration? and what business process will be supported by the integration. So I need to make sure my finance team can close their books on month end, so I need to make sure they have all the revenue numbers, or at least all the time entries or whatever from the PSA tool by a certain date. Okay, that may not be enough information to say whether you need a real-time or a batch process. So you start thinking in terms of, well, how critical is it for the accounting team to know when something's coming, or when something's been worked. And that data workflow is how fitting into their day in the life. So in order for them to close the books, they have to keep track and make sure that they reconcile with all the orders that are inside the accounting system. And therefore, that's not something that they can do in a day. They need 3 days to do it. So from a data workflow, maybe we need to pass the information over more often so that they have more time to get things reconciled. The other consideration, though, is also development. So when you're doing a batch or a near real-time integration, in many cases it's not something you just turn on. You have to actually build it. And there are plenty of tools on the market that help you do these to build integrations, but you still need to have someone that's knowledgeable about your systems, about your data, about your business process, to use those tools to connect the systems together. So you have to make sure you have the right resources available, and of course if you don't have the right resources available, what kind of vendors or contractors can you bring in to help you do either the planning and the business analysts, or to do the implementation. There's a variety of roles that you can have people fill when you're dealing with integration designs. You have to understand the systems in place, obviously, because some systems, they don't play nicely with all the tools on the marketplace. There are platforms like the Salesforce platform, which has a lot of vendors support connecting to the Salesforce database. They understand how to talk to Salesforce. There are other systems like NetSuite OpenAir, which doesn't have as much pickup in the integration tool market. That's changing quite a bit recently, but they don't natively talk to a lot of third-party tools. So what are your options? Build from scratch, or use a file transfer tool that they have, or what systems do you have in place, and what are they compatible with in the market? And then, of course, first and final, but not certainly least critical, is understanding, is this worth it? And it's not so much is it worth it because it's going to cost us $50,000 to build this integration, or $10,000 to build this integration, and whoa, isn't it nice? It's more of a how much effort is it for us to rekey it? If you're rekeying 5 invoices every month, that's probably not something that would be a benefit to spend $50,000 to build a fancy integration. If you're rekeying 150 invoices a month and you're really running out of time to get the data out, integrations make more sense. So you definitely want to understand the cost of implementation and the savings of time that your staff would benefit from in doing an integration. Those 5 items basically help you decide, okay, yes, I need an integration. Now, what kind do I have? What resources do I have available to me? What systems am I trying to connect together? How critical is the data to go from point A to point B? And those discussions help you figure out which one can I live with. Because in many cases, a batch integration may be cheaper than a real-time integration. And it really depends on what systems we're talking about. So there are a lot of pitfalls, though, you have to watch out for, especially when you're doing integrations between systems. And even systems like PSA, when they overlap with another system like an ERP or a CRM or even an HCM, they overlap, but that doesn't mean that they overlap exactly the same way. So there's a lot of stuff to consider when you are connecting systems together. And first is, what kind of data integrity do you have to make sure is in place so that if you're passing bad data from point A to point B, something happens that flags it so that you know it's bad data, okay? Is there business logic that the system will provide as part of the integration, or do you have to put that in the integration itself to make sure that the data is clean, that you're passing complete data, and the business logic is there to make sure that you're ensuring that the data accuracy is in place? Another common pitfall is understanding what are key fields and what are the common data elements, and what will each system react to as far as a key field. Integrations such as something like passing customer data over from one system to another, sometimes the system should be using key fields like database internal ID type key fields, which are unmistakable. This is this record, and this record is mapped to that record in the other system, and there's no confusion. But if you don't have those kind of key fields, you start relying on things like, well, is the name the same? And naming conventions change between systems. I like to have my project name with the project number in the front and then the description, but the data in Salesforce has the opportunity name and the salesperson. So of course that opportunity coming over creates a project with a different name. I rename it, and now the two don't look like they go together. So you want to make sure you identify key fields, and those key fields are what the integration will use to know A and B are connected, because they have key fields in there. You also have to watch out for common data. So from a data integrity and a common data perspective, because you want to pass, let's say, opportunities from Salesforce into FinancialForce or NetSuite OpenAir or something, an opportunity itself, that's great. You can create a project, but it has to be associated to some kind of account or a customer. So you have to make sure that that also gets included as part of the passover in the way. So you want to make sure you have these things tied together. The other pitfall is the completeness of information. Often I get questions to say, hey, I would really like to integrate my Concur system with my PSA, and my immediate response is, do you have your Concur system set up to understand projects? And Concur is an expense tracking system, and it doesn't naturally understand about projects. It understands about expenses and how you categorize expenses, but it's not a project-based system natively, as far as I'm aware. So that's something that you have to make sure that when you're passing data from system A to system B, where does the data go and what is it related to? And if you don't have that completeness of information, then something has to happen. Either you have to customize that in your Concur system, for example, add the project field and make it a mandatory entry when they're dealing with expenses in Concur, or you have to pass incomplete data into your PSA and require the person to fill that information out in the PSA solution, because otherwise it won't have the right association. So this pitfall is very much how much can the integration handle versus the business process that you have to implement and the impact on the end user when you build the integration. The granularity of information is an interesting one. So as you connect System A and System B, when we're talking about things like an opportunity to a project from a sales tracking system into a PSA, in many cases, and I naturally think in these terms, an opportunity drives a project one-to-one. But in many customer situations, that's not true. An opportunity may have multiple parts to it, and those multiple parts each drive a different project. So you can understand how that granularity of information, it's a one-to-many situation. And likewise, in your PSA tool, you're collecting detailed information, receipt level information, day-by-day time information, maybe even down to milestones and task level of time. And if you need to pass that information over to another system, like an accounting system or something, do you need every single one of those individual milestone, date, type transactions, or can you roll that up in a way to say, okay, for the month of June, I spent 165 hours. So the granularity of information is something that systems track information differently, so you need to understand if you need to pass it one for one, or if you have a one-to-many situation or a many-to-one in some situations. And avoiding the pitfall of understanding whether you're continually updating the data, so you're keeping things in sync, or if you're just doing a one-time push, an initial or a default setting, especially with things like an opportunity into a project from sales into PSA. As sales continues to add information or update the opportunity, do you want that same information coming into your PSA tool, or is it just a one-time creation and now the PSA tool owns it? Those are all decisions that have to be made as you're building out the workflow and understanding what system owns what data, and at what point do we stop updating information? Is it just an initial push? Things like invoice, expense data from Concur. Take expense data from Concur and push it into your PSA. You're not going to do that every single time. You're going to do it once and then deal with the information in your PSA solution. And finally, double system field ownership. So this is really understanding what system owns what data. So if I call TopStep TSC, and my TopStep consulting was synchronized with my PSA, and then I changed the name to TSC in my sales system, do I want that data to pass over to the PSA? Most likely yes, because you want to keep that data in sync. But if I changed it in my my PSA, do I want to send that change backwards into my CRM? And usually the answer is no. Usually one system owns the field. That way you have a master of the data. Very similar to accounting terms. The ERP is the system of record for accounting. Even though your PSA may have some financial data in it, like billing information or expense information, the final accounting going to an audit type data is in the accounting system. So even though there's an overlap, it's not that both systems own the data, the accounting system owns the data. So you really want to avoid the double system field ownership, it's called. You want to make sure that for every piece of information, what is the master system? Okay. And currency conversion is a tricky one. So if you have a multi-currency PSA and you're dealing with British pounds and USD and euros, and you're passing 5 from your PSA to your accounting system, you need to make sure that the accounting system knows what that 5 is, because 5 euros and 5 US dollars and 5 British pounds all have very, very different values if you do a currency conversion into, say, for example, USD. So watch out for how you're passing money values between systems and that you're tagging it with correct currency information, because that's very critical. Now, from a best practice perspective, really it's spend time up front. Spend time up front with the design and walk through the business process. What system is going to own the data? How will the data transfer over from system A to system B? What could go wrong? Like, could people change data? Could the integration fail? What's our failover scenario? What if a piece of data that's in system A does not exist in system B that needs to be there? What kind of automation should we put in place as far as data creation or making sure that we can keep the data, the information synchronized between systems? So it's really upfront business design and do walkthroughs of the whole thing end to end. Data in system A, data in system B, and come up with as many use cases as you can and try to break it. What if somebody kicks the plug out of the wall and the integration stops running? I mean, just even things like that. Like, how can we recover and how do we know that the system is working? That's another thing, is not only how to deal with disaster recovery, is how do you know that things are solid? What kind of audits do you have in place or reconciliation do you have in place to make sure the data is actually transferring correctly? So spend the time up front designing that process, the data ownership, the what-if scenarios. The other best practice is data translation. And what I mean by this is that when you have data in two different systems, it does not necessarily mean the two different systems have the exact same database structure. Most have relational databases now, but that doesn't mean they track data the same way. So you need to have something translate your square to your circle. And I like to have the integration do this heavy lifting, where you're passing a box or a square into the integration does its magic, and outspits a circle which can be understood by your PSA solution or your ERP solution. Many times I do see when integration designs are coming into place that each end system is trying to translate the data and then pass it into the integration like a tube, and the integration really just passes data from A to B and doesn't do a lot of logic. The reason I'm not a big fan of that approach where you're having the systems themselves do the translation is because what if you get rid of one of those systems? If you, let's say, you replace your Great Plains with NetSuite or with SAP, and suddenly all the logic that you had put into your PSA solution to translate the data to talk to Great Plains now has to be updated to talk in terms of SAP, when in fact, if you would have just left your source system alone and had the integration do the work, the integration itself could be updated, and it would receive the data as it would always from the PSA solution, and it would do the translation inside itself to talk to the new system. So you really would just maintain that integration logic to do the translation. So there's definitely lots of schools of thought on this one. I just think if you have the integration do the data translation, it's a cleaner implementation, and it does not end up impacting systems involved in the integration if you end up swapping out the receiving or the source system at the end of the day. And finally, define the cost versus benefit. So I use the example of 5 invoices, rekeying 5 invoices every month. And of course, you probably wouldn't even consider, the topic of integration wouldn't even come up probably at that point. But when you're getting to a point where there's data accuracy problems, which is causing extra time to reconcile and correct data, when you're running into the data volumes that are just taking too long to finish in a timely manner, and you're having to hire more people to simply do data entry, those kind of things start driving the discussion. But then you also want to weigh, okay, so the benefits are I need to reduce my time frame to get the invoices into my accounting system down to a 4-hour window. They all have to be there in 4-hour window. And what kind of integration will help get us there? So how much would it cost to develop an integration to pass the data from your PSA to your ERP? How often does it need to run? How quickly does the data need to get there? And above all, once it's in place, what will it take to maintain that integration? Things like, from a maintenance perspective, it's not so much making sure it keeps running, which of course it is, but it's also things like, what if you add new customers? Does that mean you have to, does the integration take care of that for you, or do you have to do that manually between the systems before the data can pass? What if you add new service offerings or add new accounts for tracking the different types of services you're delivering? You start new P&L centers. Does that have to be done in the systems that are talking to each other before the integration can run, or can the integration take care of that? So those are all maintenance costs and maintenance considerations, because at the end of the day, you want to make sure what you build is robust, sustainable, maintainable, and it doesn't actually increase your overhead from a staffing perspective. The goal would be to ideally either reduce staffing or be able to use the staff you have in a more effective and productive manner versus keeping everyone until 1 a.m. on the month-end close. So consider the integrations with your PSA. There's a lot you can integrate with a PSA, but that doesn't mean you have to integrate everything. Integrate what makes sense, because you really want to focus on data accuracy and consistency, reducing manual rekey efforts, and some of that also will help with sort of your business process and your compliance, like communication and having people understand what's coming and when it's coming. But start simple. Don't try to build the best bells and whistles thing. If you need to start with a batch process and a batch integration because it's quick and simple and it'll get the data going, and then build on top of that, build and transform that into a real-time integration later on when there's maybe higher volume or you're trusting the data is clean between systems. So start simple, do a small investment, and then build up on that, and that should get you to where you need to be from using a cloud print, so to speak, like an IT footprint, but it's in the cloud, so cloud print. So as I wrap up here, I'm going to stop the recording, and then we can have a conversation in case there's any questions about this or any thoughts on integration.